Hi everyone, welcome back to the D Lady Shan Show. I am D Lady Shan. Today we'll be talking about Cuba and the energy crisis happening in Cuba right now, but we're gonna go in depth to understand why we're there right now. What's been happening in Cuba right now is being described as an energy crisis, but it is deeper than that, so we're gonna get into it. It's actually an economic crisis. It is a geopolitical crisis, and every day it becomes or it increases to become a humanitarian crisis. So there are reports that basically the entire operation of Cuba is in crisis, whether it be the hospital, whether it be the transportation, public assistance, whatever it is, you name it, once it uses fuel, it becomes a crisis, and that's what's currently happening in Cuba as we speak. While most news sources or bloggers or whomever it is are telling you what's happening, I'm going to tell you how we got to this. I'm going to break down how Cuba's energy crisis started, the role of US sanctions and oil restrictions, the collapse of oil supplies and assistance, and most recent 2026 developments, which includes other Caribbean regions and basically across the world. So let's get into it. Let's start in 1959, where the Cuban Revolution began. After the revolution, Fidel Castro decided he wanted Cuba shifted politically and economically from under US's influence to a more socialist setting. Right? Before this, the United States was Cuba's primary trade partner. US businesses had huge impact in Cuba. Cuba had easier access to Western markets, whether it be to infrastructure or you name it. So basically they and the US had this relationship, right? After the resolution, that relationship deteriorated rapidly. And by the early 1960s, the United States decided, hey, we're going to put an embargo on Cuba. And this embargo restricted trade access, financial transactions, foreign investment, and crucially, imports and infrastructure. And this is where energy becomes important, because modern day energy requires spare parts, external finances, fuel imports, international trade, etc. When you think about it, when these things happen, it just takes time for the system to weaken. It just takes time. Based on what we're seeing now, you could tell that Cuba is not a big country with domestic oil reserves. Hence, they wouldn't be going through this crisis. Which means the country's electric system has heavily depended on imported oil, thermoelectric power plant, and external fuel partnerships. Based on what I'm seeing, many of Cuba's power plants are old, decades old, and they need to be replaced, repaired. They require spare plants, which must be imported. And over time, this created a structurally fractured grid. And it's crazy, right? In simple terms, if fuel imports slow down, electricity production drops almost immediately. For years, Cuba survived its energy needs largely through an alliance they had with Venezuela. They basically had a political and economic agreement, so Venezuela would subsidize oil and send it to Cuba. So this oil was essential because it allowed Cuba to support public services, maintain electricity generation, stabilize fuel supply. Then Venezuela started going through their own crisis, so therefore oil production declined and Cuba started getting less oil. This created a dangerous dependence gap because Cuba's grid was built on imported fuel, nothing domestic, right? So I've given you all of the history. Let's get into the modern pattern or the modern phase of the crisis. In recent years, the United States policies basically are forcing or directly or indirectly restricting oil going into Cuba. This includes measures that affect oil suppliers to Cuba. It affects shipping routes. It affects financial transactions tied to fuel purchases. And because suppliers fear sanctions and penalties, they weren't really shipping to Cuba, which comes with real consequences because reduced fuel shipments from allies like Venezuela and Mexico have significantly strained Cuba's ability to provide electricity for its citizens. And this is where it's not domestic anymore. This becomes geopolitical. And by 2024 to 2025, the situation became highly visible. Now the country there experiences major nationwide blackout, thermoelectric plant failures, oil shortages. So, you have areas losing power simultaneously. So it became an issue. It became a way of life issue for regular citizens. It's no longer a structural issue. It became visible. It starts to affect the person. It starts affecting daily life. Now, I've listed some additional factors. Aging infrastructure, lack of spare parts, hurricane damaging energy systems, economic inflation, reduced tourism revenue after COVID-19. Each of these factors weakens the country's ability to modernize and repair its energy grids. What we are witnessing is not a single crisis, it's a stacked crisis. Now we're in 2026, and it's been reported that Cuba is facing shortages over multiple sectors. And I have listed some of the sectors: electricity generation, public transportation, waste collection system, healthcare operations. So in some areas like Havana, garbage trucks have stopped operations because they have no fuel. Now think about your garbage sitting in your community, household to household, no one there to pick it up to take it to the disposal area where it's supposed to go. So now that creates germs and all these unnecessary things that inhumane. So these people are actually living in a dehumanizing situation.